If I haven't met you before, hi, I'm Lindsay Baccardo. I'm here to talk about generations working from home. During non-COVID times, you usually will find me on a stage talking about how to help generations work better together. I'm a huge advocate for cross-generational work and particularly how millennials can contribute meaningfully to your company or organization. And so that's why we're talking about this today. I've got my co-host Sam on with me, and Sam's going to help with the chat. She can answer any questions. I always watch the chat as I'm speaking. So you'll probably sometimes hear me like stop talking because I'm reading something and then I'm going to come back. But know that I'm watching you in the chat as well. We want this to be highly connecting. This is a conversation. And we're all dealing with unique situations. You know, I think part of what happens with generational work is that things get over generalized and then we start to create biases around what people are actually like, and they're not always true. And so I'm going to try to cut through that today and share with you what we know to be different and what everyone, just as a human being, is going to need from you as a leader as we move forward. Norma asks if I include Gen Z. Absolutely. We are in a season, you'll see Gen Z come up a few times, where Gen Z are in college, so their whole college experience is flipped on its head. Can you imagine? College is all about proximity. It's about being with your friends. It's about like living on your own for the first time. And now you're back at home with mom and dad, and you might be doing remote, and we don't know when we're going to go back to our campuses. So we will be talking about Gen Z. Feel free to ask any questions as we go. I am here to answer them. And I love this because Bree said, I'm feeling odd that some of my millennials are struggling. Oh, wait, I just lost it. Hold on one sec. Are struggling with change from paper process to electronic. Yeah, that's true. And that's millennials. It's not even just, you know, boomers or anything like that. We all are struggling with shifting. And some of that is that workforce applications that we tend to use. They're not all wildly intuitive. They're just not. So even if you're good with an iPhone, you might not really fully understand Slack right away. So I think part of that, Bree, but even as we jump in, is making sure that we slow down, get everybody on the same page, and train them how we want them to use tools. Millennials are used to technology being wildly intuitive, and not every app is. Okay, so let's jump in. Generations working from home. If I haven't met you yet, thank you for spending time with me. I know how precious your time is. A little bit background real quick. When I graduated college a long time ago now, 2006, I did what every millennial does and followed my dreams. I jumped on tour with my band at the time, and we got to travel the world, and I met people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life. And I found that we all have a lot in common, It didn't matter if I was in a prison setting or a underground pub in Europe. We all have a lot in common. We all want to be seen, heard, and understood. And even though I'm not doing music anymore, I still love it. And I learned a lot about generations when I was in the music world, because I was there when we were still putting like CDs out and people stopped buying them. People stopped buying our music because they could access it digitally. And that was one of the reasons that I started this generational research. What is changing in the world? How do you make money as a musician now? And I had to really process that. And I ultimately decided that I wanted to bring meaning to people's lives through coaching. And I went back to coaching school and I studied human behavior, and I found that happy humans are growing humans. This is one of my favorite quotes. If you plan on it being anything less than you're capable of being, you'll probably be unhappy all the days of your life. Isn't that interesting? And I know a lot of us right now, we're going to talk about the human stress response today, especially to the crisis that we all have experienced. But I find that one thing that we all want more of is growing. We want to grow, we want to grow, we want to grow. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And even in a situation like this, you're here as a leader, figuring out how to help your team and different generations in your team. Look at you, you're spending time. You could be watching Netflix, you could be zoning out, and instead you're sitting here, or maybe standing here with me, learning how to help the generations that you work with. So I have so much respect for you that you're taking time to do this today, and I'm going to fill this time with as much value as humanly possible. When I was still playing music and watching people, I thought, I'm going to take everything I've learned about being a musician and what people like to talk about after shows. I want to take all my curiosity, all my curious energy, and apply it to coaching school. So when I went through coaching school, I learned growing humans are happy humans. I learned what motivates people, that we have different values, and that there is a very distinct pattern of how to develop your career. So I created a program, Unleash My Career, and I brought it to the youngest generation at the time, which was millennials. And I built a client base just on millennials who were so hungry to grow that they pay me because their company wasn't doing that for them. And I'll tell you, if you have to get off in 5 minutes, the one thing that you could take away is that the top thing that millennials want from you are personal growth opportunities. And what is the top thing that companies in Indianapolis report to me that they suck at? Personal growth. You have a crosshair right now and an opportunity right now where your people want to grow and want opportunities to be engaged and encouraged. They want to continue to grow their skills. And it's the thing that companies struggle the most with. I built an entire business to fill that gap in this program, Unleash My Career. And so I want to give you everything that I can in this hour to help you maybe shift perspective, grab some skills, a new tool that you can use with your team moving forward. If you're like, hold on, generations, help me out. What exactly does that mean? I want to make sure to just do a quick rewind of what generations are. Generations are cohorts of people born at certain times who have very similar developmental experiences. And so boomers are born from 43 to 60. They tend to be the parents of millennials, and that's why they're always fighting. That's my theory online. And millennials are born from 1980 to about 1995. Know that all these numbers, when you're looking at them and you're figuring out which generation you are, know that these can vary plus or minus 2 years on each side, depending on the researcher that you're looking at. So if you're like, I thought I was a Gen X this whole time, now you're saying I'm a millennial? Oh, like, it's okay. It's okay. This is sociological research. So we're looking at large groups of people and finding common characteristics. And I believe that I've seen this happen all over the place, but George Orwell says it best. He says, every generation imagined itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. We see that all the time on social media, right? We're slamming each other for different reasons. And so know that I have that in the back of my mind. I know that we all kind of have a bias or a belief about generations that aren't our generation. And part of what I want to do today too is maybe have more accurate views of these different generations and what they actually mean for us in our future. Ultimately, here's what you can take away. I'm giving all the good stuff through the whole thing, but even right now, know that your experiences actually shape your expectation. That's why generational research matters, because if you were like me, I was a junior in high school when 9/11 happened. I remember a time when you could walk through an airport and never go through a metal detector, and now you're like strip searched whenever you go, right? So I have formative experiences of our country feeling less and less safe and having my privacy more and more invaded. That is part of my experience. A Gen Z can't even remember a time when we didn't have that all in place. So our experiences shape our expectations of the world, of work, of how our leaders treat us. And so each generation, it's not that we're wildly different, like we're different species. It's just that we had different formative experiences growing up that told us who we were, what work was, and what leaders are supposed to be. This is like kind of a funny little meme we made a couple weeks ago that a lot of people commented and messaged us about. It's just this idea of how each generation responds to COVID. You know, I've talked to boomers, and if you look at world history, you'll see that in the United States, typically when boomers were kids and something like COVID would happen or we'd have some type of outbreak, they're used to literally purposely infecting themselves as children. Ask a boomer. My dad was like, we used to have mumps parties. We would all get together and get sick at the same time and get it over with. So you can imagine there's some boomers right now, not all of them, but some of them, if they had those experiences growing up, they are the ones that are like, what is the big deal? We got to keep living, right? Okay. Gen Xers, in general, Gen Xers, I love you. There's 10 million less of you. And so even now you make up just over 20% of the workforce because there's just not as many of you as there are boomers and millennials. And Gen Xers tend to have, we kind of joke, they're like this middle child, but we don't want to overemphasize that. We're just saying there's typically less of you by numbers. And you were born in a time where you clearly remember playing records. You clearly remember a life without the internet. and you live wildly in the internet now. You understand email, you can do all that. So you've got this, Gen Xers are like the bridge generation. And that's what I call them. I think they're the cream to the Oreo cookie. They're the best part. There's just never enough of them. And they quietly get through issues. And if you're a Gen Xer, I'm giving you a little fist bump today. It's COVID safe, don't worry. And I know that maybe you're thinking this, I'll quietly get through this. Now, millennials were getting blamed for not quarantining. And there was several news articles who actually were mislabeling. If you're 24, you're a Gen Z, you're a 23-year-old, you're a college students are definitely Gen Zs. Millennials found themselves defending themselves the last few weeks. We're not on the beach, right? Developmentally, most millennials are in their late 20s and 30s, and they've got kids, and they're married, and they're at home just trying to deal with how to help their 6-year-old do their homework. So it's interesting because we get these biases in our head and we forget that we're all moving along. We're all growing. Millennials is not a word that you use for a young person who's just a pain in the butt. That's not what a millennial is. A millennial is somebody who's born in a time frame, typically 1980 to 1995. If they're not born in that time frame, that's not the right word. ABC News. Just a quick shout out to you for not getting that right. Okay. Gen Zs, they're typically very socially conscious. And if you look over the last, and this is true of young people in general, they question the status quo. If you look over the news in the last couple years, you'll see that they have stood up for politics. They've stood up for gun control. They've stood up for, they're the ones worried about, the safety in their school. They are more aware than we give them credit for. And yes, some of them are off on the beach during COVID, but a lot of them were saying, this is kind of a joke, but I'm going to use TikTok to tell my friends to stop social distancing. I have a 15-year-old in my life who, when she sees two people that are supposed to be social distancing in the neighborhood, she's like, I'm going to call the cops. I don't like that. So, some of the reason that you'll see college students, doesn't matter, college students 30 years ago, college students now, one of the reasons that you're going to see college students not acting with empathy for other people or with mindfulness for how they could spread this disease. The reason is biological. It's not that a whole generation is narcissistic. It's that when you are like 19, 20 years old, you don't have all the executive functioning. Your whole brain isn't developed yet. So you're not thinking about like higher reasoning. You're not thinking as much about cause and effect. You're not thinking about how can I plan or how can I make sure to take care of my neighbor? That's typically biologically not where a college student is at. They're not thinking about all the repercussions of their behavior. And so sometimes we can make this about like, there's something wrong with this generation, and some of it's just sheerly biological. They're not able to process the same way a 45-year-old can about how to manage themselves and be in society right now. They're not able to think that way. And we're asking a lot of them if we think that they can. So that's just my own little soapbox about developmental psychology. In general, we're kind of seeing, again, general, these are trends. Boomers are being, as we go through COVID together, you might find, and Bree made a good point, millennials are dealing with this too. I would say every generation is sprinting to learn the technology that's going to be needed to keep business up and running. The difference is that, again, if you were born into technology, you're basically like bilingual. You can live in both those worlds. I remember I first went on the internet when I was 13 years old. And within a few minutes, I was like, oh, I get it. I go to Ask Jeeves. I ask a question. Remember Ask Jeeves? I ask a question. I find the answer. Okay, I'm understanding how the internet works. Now, the first time you go on the internet is when you are 40, which I was at a furniture conference 3 months ago now. And somebody was like, hey, I went on the internet. I got my first email address when I was 40. Imagine the learning curve that they have right now. And millennials, from a learning curve perspective, if you are the type of person that is trying to figure out TikTok, you know what this is like. New technologies change language, they change meaning, they change the way that we convey meaning. So even like for a millennial or a Gen Xer to learn TikTok, we're kind of like, what is going on? And Gen Zs totally get it. So I would say that every generation is wiggling and learning how to use technology in a new way. And certainly boomers are. That's one way we can support our entire team, is make sure that we're slowing down and teaching people exactly how we want to use technology. It will be intuitive to some. It will not be. intuitive to other people. And maybe you figure that out as you and your team started to use Zoom or used a different type of technology, and you realize, oops, we're not all on the same page. This is like learning a whole new language, right? Another thing that we're looking at is that the millennials, the kids of boomers, may be more likely because of COVID to look for stability. So being sure to communicate stability. Millennials as a generation are the most in debt and most educated, and those two pieces are tied together. The average millennial has $40,000 worth of student debt. And so now if they lose their job, now we've got a bigger issue on our hands. So they have a ton of debt for their age. Only 24% of millennials are financially literate, like basic literacy around finances. And so you have the way that they're most vulnerable, or one of the ways they're most vulnerable, is that they have the most debt, the least education about finances, right? And they're looking now for some stability. So just something to think about. Gen Xers, one of the predictions as we come out of COVID will be that they might be reconsidering their career path. You're at this point, we're all at this odd pause point, right? Where we're like, do I really like what I'm doing? Do I want to be a leader in this industry? Do I want to change? We'll see. Millennials are look through the lens of purpose a lot. They look through the lens of, I want to work with companies with good culture and give me a purpose. And Gen Xers, it's believed that Gen Xers will do the same. They'll start to think that way as well. Like, am I making the most of my time? Is this really what I want out of life? Almost an existential space, because you're in like the second half of your career. Gen Zs, if you're working on a college campus, Gen Zs are reconsidering the college experience entirely. And I'll tell you what, before COVID was a word that we all knew, Gen Zs were not as quick to sign up for college like millennials were. We already knew that. We had been talking about it. I do a lot of work in the Greek life space with sororities, fraternities. I was on with IU today. And college students have, because their parents are typically Gen Xers, they're also, Gen Xers are willing to go kind of outside the norm, outside of the box. And Gen X parents are more comfortable with their kids not getting a 4-year degree. And so Gen Zs are getting the message of, there's a lot of different ways I can make money. I could go to a trade school. I could just go right into business. There's all these different ways now. And we're seeing that there's different kind of avenues that people can make a living that didn't even exist 15 years ago. You could be an Amazon seller. So we are watching Gen Zs go, okay, if I'm not doing like the in-person experience, what am I really going to college for? What do I really want? So you can see that, and this won't be true of every single person. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. I want to take a minute and get a drink of water. And I want to hear from you in the chat. What are you reconsidering, or what has shifted for you? Tell us what generation you're in, and then what's shifted for you as we've gone through COVID. I'd love to hear from you. I want to read what we're saying out loud. Yep. So Gen Xers are reconsidering their career path. That does not surprise me. I'm happy to talk to you after about that too. Gen Z is approaching the college experience very differently. Yes. Than the traditional 4-year university, saying that's exactly right. And so I want to say this, a lot of these pieces were in motion, and COVID accelerated them. It put gasoline on the fire that was already burning. I already knew, as somebody who researches generations, that Gen Z wasn't going to be as quick to sign up for a 4-year degree because they didn't want the debt, and they knew they knew their parents would allow them to go to trade school or something else. So this has accelerated what was already happening. We are not like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That's happening. Let's see what else people are saying. Like the idea of asking for more training on the technology without feeling inadequate. Yes, as leaders, assume that people don't know how to use new tech. It takes me time. Sam, who's on this call with us, she wanted to use a new type of, it wasn't even new, but it was a type of like checklist where we could keep each other on track of what we were getting done. She wanted to use something, and I was like, I can't handle anything new, and I'm 36. And I still had those moments. So we've got to take time, slow down, and be trained if you want to introduce new technology. More technology is not the answer. It's not always the answer. Una's on. I love this. Hi, Una. I haven't seen you for a while. Okay. So Jordan said, I'm a millennial who is recently graduated and started my career. And yes, you're looking for stability, which a decade ago, millennials were touted as wanting like an adventure. I'm a typical millennial. I went and played with my band, and we're watching too, saying, okay, wait, we probably need, and I'll show you in a minute, I'll show you in this presentation, we'll probably actually need more stability first before we can become our highest selves, and that's natural. Laura Taylor says this, she's a Gen Xer. She says, I don't like the blurred work-life balance that work from home causes. That makes sense to me. Gen Xers are known for the generation that stood up against watching both their parents work their tails off. They're the generation that we call them the latchkey generation. There was a pattern where kids would come home from school, both their parents would be working, daycare didn't exist yet, and they watched their parents work their tails off, and they were the first ones that said, whoa, we got to find a better work-life balance. And now guess what? We're working from home, and we're all up in your business all the time. So it does not surprise me that Laura said that. I'm gonna look at all these. You guys have such great comments. This is awesome. Millennials focused on saving. Yep. Recreating career path and having no clue what the next step is. Janet, feel free to reach out to me. We can definitely talk about that. And Catherine Donaldson said, and this is for everybody, I miss face-to-face interaction. Zoom doesn't quite cut it. I agree. Well, I know that psychologically it doesn't cut it. If you have time, you can jump on our webinar on Thursday. We're going to talk with a neuroscience expert, Ann Betts, about why Zoom fatigues us so bad and why it doesn't actually help us feel more connected necessarily. Okay, this is so good. I could read these all day, but I definitely want to make sure to get you all this information. Keep sharing your ideas. And Sam, can you put a link for everyone if they do want to come to like the zoomed out conversation? Yep. Can you put a link in the Zoom chat? Thank you.
I want to do that right now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, let's keep going. So I want to talk to you. We're going to talk about generations, but it's really important that we also talk about the human stress response. You're going to see how this has panned out over the last month. We have to overlay the very human experience of the stress response on top of generational research, okay? It wouldn't be right to pass over this. So all of us at different times, we have different amounts of stress that we can handle. And I find developmentally that young people with less professional experience get more stressed out because they have never experienced things before. Remember we said our experiences create our expectations. So if you've been through this a million times before, if you've had to work from home, or even like with my daddies, like we've done the chickenpox parties, we've done the mumps parties, this isn't new. This whole COVID-19 may not stress you out a ton. If you're young and this is the first big life, like rattling thing you've been through, there's a good chance that your stress is through the roof. And I want to take a minute and please, would you seriously take a picture of this screen, send it to your team and ask them what percentage of time they're in amygdala hijack. You might be surprised. Now, we've been doing webinars now for 6 weeks, all for free to let people know about amygdala hijack and how to work from home. And this concept is actually from Daniel Goleman. And he said, anytime that your body thinks that you're being chased by an alligator, or in this case, there's an invisible virus that you might totally recover from, you might get really sick and die from, it could be anywhere, we can't see it. You can imagine how that sends your body into hyper stress overdrive mode. And as we've done this webinar over the last 6 weeks, we've noted that at the beginning, amygdala hijack was through the roof. People, college students particularly, who were on my webinars would say, I'm 70% of the time, I feel like I'm in amygdala hijack. And I see now that we're kind of stair-stepping down and we're kind of finding our new normal as much as we can. But this is what amygdala hijack is, and it's really important to know about. It's when your frontal lobe is actually disabled. You cannot do executive functioning. Your cognitive abilities, that higher reasoning, problem solving, planning, concentration, empathy, controlling your responses, having flexibility in your cognition, even your memory. How many of us, I can attest, and Sam can tell you too, because she's on my team, my memory has sucked the last month. It's kind of coming back now, but there's been a lot of times where I'm like, how did I zone out on that? How did I forget about that? How did I forget about that? Amygdala hijack, it's a human stress response. Your body, without you trying, has a part of it that's like, I'm gonna make sure we stay alive. I'm going to make sure I'll do whatever it takes. Even if I have to take away your memory, I'll make sure that you're safe from that alligator, that COVID alligator. That's what your brain does. So if you're like me, and the first time you went to the grocery store and there was no toilet paper left, and now even I'm getting used to it now, but you know those first couple times when people are wearing masks and like everybody's looking at each other weird, that will send you into stress mode. And your team, if you ask your team, how often are you in amygdala hijack? Or you can ask your team on a scale of 1 to 10 how stressed you are. When people are at like 8, 9, 10, they're in stress mode, you know, if they're in amygdala hijack mode 80% of the time, or their stress is at an 8, 9, 10 out of 10, their work is going to suffer. And you can see why. Biologically, they're not going to be able to focus. That would be normal. So if you're leading teams right now, would you just keep this in mind? Ask your team to report into you and tell you how often they feel like they're in this spot. And you're going to see over the next few weeks, we are going to crawl up together. We're going to move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when I was doing, go rewind with me before COVID, I'd go to conferences and I would say, if you're in white collar industry, there's a good chance that your job supports your physiological and safety needs. You're probably not thinking about where you're going to get your next meal, right? If you're an accountant. The thing that millennials would typically look for is that next layer up on Maslow's hierarchy, which is love and belonging. So I'd ask companies, what do you do during your onboarding to create love and belonging? And it was like the light bulb went off. And right now, we're at the very bottom of Maslow's pyramid, physiological and safety needs. If you don't know about Maslow, he was a psychologist in the 40s and 50s, and he studied what motivates people. And he found that there's actually this hierarchy that everybody has to climb. Every individual, every society has to climb up themselves. And so if you're at the very bottom, you're worried about your physiological needs. Think third world, think I drop you in a jungle, think, you know, I don't even have rice. I don't have anything to eat. Your physiological needs take all of your brain width. I want to figure out how to get food, water, shelter, food, water, shelter. How do I get it? How do I get it? Now, when those needs are met, you go up a level to safety needs. This is where your health lives, your body and your health, and your immune system lives here. So think about for a minute, all of us, if we had like you are here, red arrow, it would be pointing right now to physiological and safety needs, and especially a month ago. That's all we could think about. So I get so frustrated because we would see that these motivational speakers would be like, this is your chance to learn a language. Don't waste this time. You're going to regret it. And I'm thinking, dude, people's brains aren't going to be able to do that. Now, here's what's interesting. Different generations, based on what they've already been through in life, if you've been through this before, you're like, our needs will be met. It'll be fine. I've seen this happen before. If you haven't, this is going to be more stressful for you. Ultimately, we're all wanting to move to the top of self-actualization. And every week, as a leader, if you could just keep this, again, you can snap a picture of this, keep this in mind, ask like, where's my team at? And try not to assume anything, because the other piece in generational research that gets overlooked is just the developmental psychology and the place that this person is in growing their own family, growing their own experiences. So if you're a grandparent, you may have a very different view, and you're a boomer, right? You'll have a different view of what COVID means than if you're a millennial, you don't have kids yet, you haven't been touched by another human being in 6 weeks, and you've been in isolation. You're having wildly different experiences. So ultimately, every generation is looking to climb Maslow's pyramid. That's human, it's global phenomenon that this is the pyramid that we climb. It's important to know where your people are at right now. If you're at a point where you've kind of hit some stability, millennials used to want love and belonging. Now they're willing to move down a little bit on this pyramid and say, like, I just need to make sure I get paid regularly because I've got a lot of financial stress right now. You'll see that we're moving on this pyramid more than normal. So a good thing to do is to ask your team, where would you say you're at on Maslow's hierarchy? Based on research by Gallup is a research monster, right? They've got longitudinal data. They've got data going all the way back to the Great Depression, and they've got a lot of quantifiable longitudinal data. So Gallup, being the awesome servant that they are to the public, said, let's go back to every crisis, because I didn't go through the Great Depression. Did you? I'm only 36. I think I'm 36. I didn't go through that. Didn't go through World War II. I went through 9/11, right? But they said, okay, regardless of what generation, what are the human needs that come out of tragedies? Like when a crisis happens, what do humans need in general? Here are the 4 universal needs that followers have of their leaders. So doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, no matter what. They need trust, compassion, stability, which we've mentioned, which hits every generation differently, and hope. Hope. I want to ask you, I want to take a breather with you here. I want to ask, what have you done? Please inspire us. You can jump in the chat. I'd love to have you raise your hand and Sam will bring you on with me live. But I would love to hear from you in the chat, or you can raise your hand. What have you done, or what have you seen your organization and company do that has addressed one of these needs? This is so important that either you humble brag, I don't care, please do this, or you tell us what your company did and let us know how awesome it is to work for you. I'm just going to take some water here. I'm going to wait because it's so important that we see in real time how leaders are doing this right now in this crisis. What have you seen work? I'll tell you one thing that I've done with my team, and Sam has been there with me, is that I do check-ins. I want to check in with them, especially when we have bigger team meetings. I want to know how everybody's doing. Make sure that we are reminding people it's okay to be human. It's okay to have an off day. Tejas says a lot more check-ins. That's great. Compassion. My manager acknowledges that we all have unique challenges. Yes. The acknowledgement, Shannon says, goes so far. Isn't that true? Management, Katie says, our management committee does a town hall once a month, and our CEO puts out weekly videos and tells the good, bad, and the ugly. Yes, that helps to build trust. Let's just be real. Guaranteeing pay, Dina says, that's a great way to create some stability, right? Like you're not going to just magically not get a paycheck. You can know that you're going to be paid. Having the guarantee, if you're a leader and you can just guarantee even month by month, hey, May is totally normal. We're not doing anything different in May. I did that with my team. They know all our finances are super transparent. So it was like, hey, everybody already knows how we did in April, how we performed. So we're fine in May. As transparent as you can be. Jessica Betts, promoting mental health benefits. Yes. Trust via transparency. Lane said it really well. Vicky says our leader's been great with communicating and encouraging. She's trusting us to get the work done and creating a stable environment, even though we are all working remote. Yes, she's also checked in a lot. Our company put together a plan to provide a portion of pay to laid off employees. Yes. Una from Luna, I love it. I get to say that again. Luna committed to not laying off anyone, which meant that some folks had their jobs changed drastically from what they did before, but everyone is on board. Our culture manager has also done a ton of checkups and created virtual events to keep us connected. Well, everybody, if you can, look at this chat, look what people are doing. It's so inspiring to see us respond with hope, with compassion, building trust by being transparent about where things are at. It's beautiful. Making sure you take time off is huge too. And this is one thing, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but if you are struggling with adapting and you're like, when are we going to go back? When are we going to go back? This isn't working for me. This is going to sound counterintuitive, but just play with this for a minute in your mind. Imagine that nothing changes, that you can't go back, that all of a sudden I was able to give you certainty and say, no one's going back to work until January 1st, 2021. Some of you are like, don't even joke about that. That's not funny. But just imagine with me for a moment that we are not going to get out of this in 2 weeks. Okay. What would you do differently to take care of yourself? I ask my clients this question, and some of them will say, I'd probably set up a better desk that's more ergonomic. Or one of them said, I would get outside more and exercise more if I knew like this is going to be it. Because some of us mentally are holding on to get back that day. That actually puts us in a victim state. We are at the effect of when we go back or not. So just as an encouragement to you as a leader, if you are like, watching the clock, when are we going to go back? Think about, okay, what do I actually need? Imagine this is never going to change. And that's not true, but just imagine that it's never going to change. What would I do to help myself right now? You might handle your work different. You might handle your balance, your work-life balance, because it's very draining on your nervous system to be like waiting for, at least in Indiana, Governor Holcomb's like announcement, right? It's very draining. And so in this time of unknown, what can you do for yourself, and how could you help your team? People are definitely saying ergonomics. That one's huge. Making sure, and I would just say this too, the more that you can stand, I'm standing right now. Obviously I can't move this much in a chair, but the more that you stand, the less likely you are to struggle with depression. If you're sitting for 7+ hours a day, and you're only walking from your bed to the kitchen and back up again, you are 3 times as likely to deal with depression compared to somebody that sits 4 hours a day and moves their body 30 minutes. So as much as you can, move your body and keep moving, and not just think we'll get back to the office someday. Truly, the better off you'll be. Just something to think about as we continue to talk about this. So these are the 4 needs that people have. And so would you even take a picture of this and ask yourself, what could I do today to create more trust, to be more compassionate, to show some stability, to continue to share in hope? I really do think that you have the resources you need to figure out how to do this. And I'm going to give you some, we're going to get super tactical right now, okay, to help with these universal needs. Some of you are saying this to me. Cool. But what can I do practically? Here's the first one. Make communication clear. Hold on a second. I can't see my own slide. Okay. Make communication clear, easier, and more frequent. So communication styles and tools. Keep this in mind. Each generation grew up with different tools that use different strengths. So obviously boomers they've spent more of their lifetime talking to people in person and over the phone. Millennials, I won't pick up my phone unless I know the number, and I'm sure of it, right? So we all have had different experiences with technology. It doesn't mean that some of us are smarter or dumber than other people. It just means we are more comfortable with some than others. So consider quality, efficiency, and tools that highlight true human connection right now. This is what I mean. Not everything needs to be a Zoom call, but not everything needs to be an email. I train millennial leaders, use email for very transactional experiences, paper trails, meeting requests, things like that. Whenever you can pick up the phone and have a verbal conversation, you will save time. You'll actually save time because you can talk faster than you can type, and you can listen faster than you can read. So 1-minute conversation with somebody, just a quick phone call, and millennials, we're going to have to get used to picking up our phone again. It doesn't always have to be FaceTime, but a quick phone call is more efficient to figure out a problem or to communicate back and forth than the emails that go respond, reply, back and forth 10 times. So think about it. Your team might need to reset some ground rules of how you communicate. Another thing you can do is, if you are on a lot of company calls, I have one client that she has a call every morning. It used to be a 20-minute like group huddle. It's turned into an hour to an hour and a half call. And after that, you're just like toasted and you haven't even started the day yet. One thing you can do is take a walking meeting. If you can combine moving and not be distracted, like don't take your dog that chases squirrels while you're on the call, okay? But if you can move while you're on the call, that will help you too. And make sure everybody has, this is so silly, but if you're gonna be doing this for the long haul, send people headphones that they love or give them a credit. Hey, I know we're doing a lot of these calls and we all want privacy. Here's a credit at the Apple Store for new earphones. Whatever it takes, think about how you can, as a leader, make communication easier, more frequent, and really more appropriate for whatever you're needing at that time. We all will have to add this filter. What is the most efficient way I can do this? How do I make sure my team is experiencing compassion and not just like a, how are you, email check-in, right? So it's both. We have to figure out how to use both. None of these tools are bad. Texting isn't bad. Zoom isn't bad. It's just how we use them. You don't use a hammer to get a screw in the wood, right? So we've got to use the right tools at the right times. And the more that you spend just a little energy thinking about that and planning that, the more easily your team can continue to adapt. Another way to do this which we've talked about, is to demonstrate compassion by understanding the human stress response and then listening. The human stress reaction is real. I asked you to take a picture of that slide. I would really encourage you to show them like this is, or just Google amygdala hijack and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and make sure that you as a leader understand why maybe some of your teammates are acting kind of off. And it may not even be about age. It may just be that you have a boomer that's acting off, or you have a millennial that's acting off. It may not be one or the other based on generations. It's just the stress that we're all under. Here are some of the stressors that people are telling me they need more compassion around, okay, from you. They need to hear you say, I understand if you're overwhelmed about what you need to do first. Now think about if you're new to the workforce, if you've only been in, I was talking to somebody who's only been at their job for 2 months and then COVID hit. So they're barely trained. They barely are in it. They're a millennial. Of course, they're going to be overwhelmed about what to do first. Now, if you're a boomer or an Xer and you've been doing this work for a decade, there are other stressors, but you may not be overwhelmed about what to do first, right? No accountability and confusion around work, same thing. Depending on how long you've been in the workforce, depending on the breadth of your professional skills, some things may be easier than others. Another one to look at and it's not just millennials. I just see that there's a lot of millennials who are single and who are living alone, and isolation is huge. Isolation is really, really difficult on the human psyche. When I used to work in prisons, when I did prison ministry and brought my band in and did that type of thing, we would talk to the inmates, and the thing that they dreaded the most was what? Solitary confinement. It's inhumane. So if you have people on your team who are by themselves, I know there's a coach in Indy who's sending them t-shirts, who's being encouraging, anything that you can do to let them know that they're not alone in a way that's safe, that's great. The other day we visited our aunt. She's 75 years old. We knocked on her door and then ran. We ran like 6 feet back, but just she's by herself. Do what you can to understand the generations that are in your life and their special needs. And then working with children. If you're a Gen Xer, if you have Gen Xers on your team, and some millennials in particular will have young elementary aged kids typically right now. Gen Xers may too. Ask them what it's like to try to be the teacher. There's a reason that teachers are licensed. Trying to be a teacher to your kids. And then on top of that, like navigating their software that they're using as a class, it's a lot. And I'm going to say this, you don't have to take this, okay? But I'm telling people that it's the average amount of work hours a day, particularly for a parent, they're winning if they can get 4 hours of work in a day. If you have kids, you know that they're getting their schoolwork done in 2 hours. So you don't have the normal like 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. time. You get like 8 to 9. And then we need breakfast. And then we're doing breakfast. And then it's 9 to 9:15. So some of this is just the stage of life. I actually am the type of generational consultant that's like, generations are not the answer for everything. We really are looking at the stage of life, the individual. There's other pieces that have to be included. So please consider the stage of life that your team is in and the people on your team is in. It's not just a millennial problem. It's not just a Gen X problem. It's that there's all these other pieces, all these other factors, particularly because of COVID. I want to put this out there too. If you're in Indiana, Brie, I love that you did a shout out to the parents. Parents, love you. You have a hard job. You actually have, I was watching just as a quick soapbox, I was watching a physician talk about like, actually what you're trying to do is impossible. It's impossible and you have to do it. So if you're leading parents, please know that they have a layer of distraction and stress on them that they have never had to deal with before. Okay. I'll get off of that. But if you are in Indiana, I know some people are here from New York, some people are here from all over the country. I know that we're not the only ones, but I also can only speak for Indiana. 1 in 4 Hoosiers are drinking while working from home. That number's kind of low. I think it's probably more than that. We are seeing an excess of substance use and abuse. Google it. You're going to see exactly what we're talking about. The human stress response. Remember we were talking about that earlier? Every human being unconsciously is trying to regulate their nervous system right now. There's a lot of ways to regulate your nervous system. You can work out, you can get good sleep, You can have compassionate, caring people in your life. You can use substances. Alcohol is one that we use culturally all the time. And drinking is through the roof right now. I'll tell you this too, Indiana's 211 hotline, this is from the Indy Star. It used to, 211 is a mental health hotline, similar to 911, but mental health. They were getting 1,000 calls a day. Now how many are they getting? 25,000. They have gone up 25x, 25 times what they're used to getting. They're getting over, imagine that. So you're used to getting, they can't even contain the amount of calls that they're getting. And the addiction hotline went from an average of 20 a week to 20 a day. So there's a good chance too on your team that there could also be issues of domestic violence. Domestic violence is up. We know that too. So on your team, think about what types of coping skills do your teammates have? And again, if you're younger in your professional career, you may not have as many coping skills. You may, but there's a good chance that you won't. That stress resilience takes time. And these are some of the ways that it's coming out. So checking in on your team. Somebody said in an earlier webinar, boomers aren't going to be as transparent as millennials are about how they're doing. And sometimes they don't expect to have their boss. A boomer would be like, I don't want you to see inside my home on Zoom. I don't want you to know how many dogs I have. Like, this whole experience for them may be uncomfortable because of how they see authority and work and the separation of work and life. Millennials don't see a separation between work and life. It looks like this. It's all intertwined because of our phones, right? My email's on my phone. I was already checking my email, my work email at 7 o'clock at night. That part hasn't changed. So you'll also see that some conversations, maybe people aren't as comfortable. Certain generations, or just individuals too, may not be as comfortable about saying how they're really doing. Just have this in the back of your mind, that if the statistics are this alarming in general, your team is probably dealing with this too, unfortunately. So how else can we show compassion? I'm going to give you 3 coaching skills that you can use: acknowledging, validating, asking open-ended, empowering questions. Each one of your employees is in a different situation. We can make some broad strokes like we did with generations, but they're in a different situation. So you might have a boomer who is struggling with tech. Acknowledging, like, I know we're asking you to learn a lot of new tech tools. It would be a lot, considering how we worked in the office before. Validating thoughts and emotions is saying, I can see that this is frustrating too. It makes perfect sense that it's frustrating. And then after you've acknowledged and validated each person's individual scenario, which probably isn't your scenario, it's probably wildly different, you can start asking some questions to help them get unstuck and to move through their stress. Take a picture of the slide and just use this whenever you want to, okay? Or a version of this. It makes perfect sense that when you got a last minute email asking you to do a new project, you saw it as, whatever they said, disrespectful, or you saw it as rude and you felt disrespected. Whatever it is, the best thing you can do right now is acknowledge and validate each person for where they're at. They're probably not where you're at. That's what's wild. They're probably not dealing with the same things you are. And so we have to take into account everybody else's experiences. One thing I would say as a leader in general is try not to compare your situation or their situation to someone else, because we all have very unique scenarios. You also don't have to agree with it to acknowledge it. You might be like, dude, it's not that hard to make the call at 10 o'clock. I don't know why this is so hard for you. But again, you don't have to agree with what they're struggling with. Just say, I can see that it's hard for you to do this. The last thing is help your team move to solutions. After you've acknowledged and validated them, especially when somebody's under a ton of stress, if you don't take a minute to be like, I can see this is hard. It makes sense that this is hard given this situation. If you don't do that, it will be harder. Humans dig their heels in and they don't want you to tell them the answer. They don't want you to give them a solution because they don't feel seen, heard, and understood yet, right? So one thing you can ask after you have acknowledged and validated somebody is to ask them, what options do you have moving forward? You will not be able to give your team solutions right now because of what they're going through. You don't know their situation fully. So it's better for them to come up with their own solutions in the context of their home and in their environment. And here's the other piece. If you are in fight or flight, which would be normal, if you find yourself in amygdala hijack, if you feel overwhelmed, know that being stuck right now is human. If you have a moment or you hit a wall, I hit a wall last week where it was like, when are we going to be done? We're all going to have moments like that. It's human. And being able to accept that for yourself, high achievers out there, being able to accept that for yourself is huge. Shifting your perception. Okay, truly, and you've all had this happen. Several times a week, I'll get an email and I will totally misread it because I'm under so much stress. I'll misread it and get mad. It happened just the other day. I came downstairs, I'm like, can you believe this email? Had somebody else read it. Oh, no, this is the opposite of what you think it says. So know that your perception, even as a leader, may be a little twisted right now because of the stress that you're under, right? And this is where biases can creep in too. If you have a bias around boomers not knowing how to use technology, or millennials, not being, and by bias, I mean, you actually have judgment around it. There's a difference between acknowledging like, oh, this person's struggling, whoever it is, with technology, versus all boomers can't attach a PDF. All boomers are horrible at this. Those are different. You can tell that those are different, right? So just know that your biases might come up too around people, and you'll be writing some stories about what you think people are doing at home that may or may not be true. The other thing you can do, and I encourage everyone to do this, I had a client reach out to me today, is to change your physiology and your environment. If you need to, one of the best things you can do, it can be as easy as taking a walk, take a shower, drink some water, change your clothes. If you're having a hard time feeling motivated, put on a real shirt. That can help. So this is about, if you're at a 10 or a 9 on the stress scale, the first thing to do is to just get your stress down. And your team will need that too. Your team will need you to help them get their stress down. Here's another thing that you can do. We're talking about hope, right? The Gallup research said that in any crisis, we need to hear you speak hopefully. So remind your team, this is how we change the world around us. This is how we're changing the city that we're in. This is how we change the community. Here's another one. How does each employee make a difference? Take a minute and remind them of their importance on the team, and how when they engage and help, what a difference they make. Here's another one that I've used a lot that's been helpful. When you're communicating hope, what's the story of your organization? Why did it get started, and what has it already been through? For most sororities and fraternities, sororities were founded oftentimes in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because women couldn't vote. So that was women coming together, linking arms to be a voice in their community when they didn't have a voice at the ballot. And so if you've been around, if you're an org that's been around for 100 years, you've seen a few things. And if you can go back to your own archives or communicate to your team why they can be hopeful, what you've gotten through before and what you're confident you'll get through in the future, and how you are changing the world, you will build and foster hope in them. Your team will need that from you. And I'll tell you, millennials in particular are watching how companies are responding. Millennials are very sensitive to corporate culture, to culture in general. They want to work in places where there's healthy culture, where they can keep growing personally, where they understand how their behavior affects the bottom line and affects the world. They want to know how your company right now is changing the world. And so that used to be a millennial thing, if you will. It's really the future of work. And COVID is showing everyone's underbelly. How does your culture really act under stress? COVID is revealing that. There are some brands that are going to shoot through the roof because they treated their employees so well and they did these things that Gallup talks about, and some are not going to do as well. Some are going to collapse because people don't feel taken care of, and it's really a deterrent to want to work there. Okay, I want to be sensitive for time. I know we're almost up. Some of you are probably done with your fancy lunch. So a couple other things to be mindful of. Be open to evolving your leadership style. Logistics and planning, just planning like the normal everyday, let's make sure everything gets done. Accountability, those are not relational glue. That's just getting the done. It's not relational glue. Your people will need to hear a strong vision, not just accountability. They'll need to be inspired to act, not just, hey, did you get that done? Here's the checklist. And you might need to collaborate and find the right tech tool. It might just be as simple as Zoom. It might be something else, Slack, I don't know. But find a tool where you can collaborate to come to the best solution. A lot of what I've talked about for years on stages has been about millennials, what they want out of work, and how other generations can understand them. What I was really doing was talking about the future of work, it really is the future of work through a generational lens, because work has changed so much. And I can show you, even now, leadership style has changed. I showed this earlier today in an earlier webinar or an earlier keynote with an awesome group of people. But if you went back, the leadership evolution is continuing. If you went back to the 1920s, leadership was about inducing obedience, respect. It was about forcing these things. Listen to me. Don't ask why, do it. And parenting modeled that too, by the way, which is connection. If you were to go all the way to the 2000s, what's leadership about now? It's about influencing others to understand and agree. It's about working together. It's about facilitating individual and collective efforts. The definition of leadership already changed. Before COVID, it had changed. COVID forces that change. It forces us to look at how we lead people into the future. Leadership acumen is now measured by your ability to transform a diverse group of humans into a cohesive, effective, and compassionate team. So if anything, I hope that this afternoon luncheon together reminded you that this is an opportunity. Yes, you're in the human stress reaction. Yes, you're moving through it. And when you feel like your physiological needs and safety needs are met, it is your job as a leader to create love and belonging. And when people come back to work, they're going to want to know that they belong with you and that you're going to help them ultimately build their esteem and self-actualize. Use Maslow's hierarchy as a way to talk to your team about where they're at. Know how far you can push them based on where they're at too. If their basic needs aren't being met, they're going to need you to respond to that and be compassionate there. Leadership acumen, we have to be so much more flexible. We need so much more EQ than we've needed in the past. COVID just highlighted what was already true. If you want to stay connected, you can text me, email me, do whatever you need to do. You can jump on LinkedIn. We do a lot of free training on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay connected to you. Thank you for sharing your time with me, your precious hour during a time when you could be doing a lot of different things. You spent it here connecting with me and with each other. And I so appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm going to if you need to hop off, this would be the time to hop off. I'll do a few Q&A questions and then we will all get back to it. A lot of you are just saying thank you. I want to make sure to say you're so welcome. I'm in this with you. We are all wiggling through this and figuring it out. And if at any point you want to bounce an idea off me or have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to connect with you and be helpful in whatever way makes sense for you. So thank you for being here. Thank you all. That's so kind that you guys are writing to me in the chat. That means a lot. We're doing this just to be helpful. We think it's so important that you have the support that you need as a leader. So thank you for taking a minute just to show your gratitude. That means a lot. Okay, everybody, I'm going to let you head back to work. I'm so glad we got to do this. Let's stay connected. Later this week, and Sam, once again, will you put it one more time in the group chat? We have a webinar that you might, oh, she already did it, mind reading. We have a webinar about how to not feel totally zoomed out based on this time of our life, how to build resiliency. Send your team to it. You can come to it, but we'd love to have you on. Next week, we'll have a whole nother set of interviews and webinars for you. Next week, I'm going to be interviewing a celebrity life coach and New York Times best-selling author. So that'll be really interesting. So stay tuned. We'll make sure to email you about it, but more to come. Thank you for spending time with us. And we'll stay connected. I'll talk to you soon.